This hearing kind of brings some light to this issue that the media really, they were scooped. And so in a sense that they're having to cover this issue when really they should have been the ones to investigate and reveal this is telling. No doubt there's fraud everywhere. When you're spending trillions of dollars, there's going to be pockets of fraud. But one of the things that's been revealing this year as we've worked through the DOGE process is uncovering the extent of the fraud, how it's been systemized, weaponized, and how we've really unveiled that it's the world's history's largest money laundering scheme. And much of this should be a bipartisan issue to go after the waste, fraud, and abuse, but what we found out is much of the taxpayer funding is going to uphold leftist organizations and their campaign practices and the like. What's particularly telling about this issue in Minnesota isn't the fact that there's waste, fraud, and abuse. No doubt that's happening in a number of states, and we need to continue the work to clean it up. But the way that this has been systemized, institutionalized, and the corrupt and corrosive nature and even criminal coercion that went on from the governor's office and his administration is particularly troubling. I think it's notable that the Biden administration was aware of this, even as they tried to sell the Harris-Walz administration on the American people, and perhaps that's why we didn't see this come to light as we should. But Representative Hudson, I appreciated something you said in your testimony in the sense that you said how the structure of these programs creates incentives that reliably produce the waste, fraud, and abuse across multiple service areas, regardless of the program or intent. And this is kind of what we see oftentimes, that for good intentions maybe, Congress upstands these programs, but over the decades what we've seen is they've expanded to where many of them almost end up being a system of waste, fraud, and abuse with a veneer of care and concern for people. And our job in Congress is to help bring the tools to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so the ranking member said, where fraud exists, we should look into it. We should hold people accountable. What we see coming from the left a lot of times is they're fine with reactionary. We're fine in bringing prosecutions after the fact because the money's already gone out. We're fine with prosecuting people who do ballot harvesting once the ballots are in the pot and we can't separate them. But it's far better for us to prevent it. I'd like to talk I'll start with you, Mr. Hudson, but if y'all want to jump in, what controls states should be putting in, but really it comes down to us in saying whatever federal dollars you are receiving, you should be getting these controls in place. So could you speak to the institutionalization of this fraud and the schemes that are in place, maybe list some examples and then speak to some of the controls that you would recommend that we take on legislatively to make sure states are doing their job?
It's a very big question, and I'll try to be concise. So I haven't put a whole lot of thought into what Congress should do, given my state legislative role, but I can tell you that states are primarily responsible for the administration of these programs, for setting up rules, for engaging in verification and compliance. And so what I imagine Congress can do is provide either incentive or some form of, for lack of a better term, punishment to states who fail to do that.
Currently, states are actually incentivized, in a sense, to game the system against the American taxpayer.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the programs in Minnesota need to be redesigned from top to bottom. I mean, it needs to be like a demolition and a rebuild, because the way they're currently structured, I think most Americans, when they think about benefit programs, they think about like their neighbor and how they would help out their neighbor. But that's not how these programs work. It's not relational. It doesn't come with expectations or gratitude or an incentive to make your life better. It is set up to create a perpetual industry out of taking money from taxpayers.
Yeah, that's troubling. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I think one of the most practical things you can do is to require documentation from the recipient and from the provider. In Minnesota, most of these providers are set up and the recipients based on attestation. And nobody then goes and checks, are they really eligible? Are the services actually being provided? We had the housing stabilization program They estimate 90% of it was fraud. Nobody checked if services were actually being provided. And I think you could also require repayment to the feds if there's fraud, and that would make states pay attention to administration if they had to repay the money if it was not spent on the proper services.
Thank you. Those are a few good tips. We'll hopefully stay in communication. My time's up.
Chair.
I know we opened up a can of worms there that could take another hour or two, but thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Min.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate today's hearing, and I